one more coming in now. And yep, I've got 5 after. So I'd say let's go ahead and get started. So just one quick note, everyone who came in should be on mute by default. So let's, if we can all stay on mute just in case there's any background noises or whatnot as far as interrupting the audio. And then as we get towards the end, when we open it up for questions and comments, that we'll be able to take people off mute one by one if you wanted to chime in. So first and foremost, thank you so much everyone for joining us today. We're going to be talking about data collection for reopening success. And I know that everyone might be in a different state of their reopening plan, from not having a target opening date yet to being fully open and operational or somewhere in between on that spectrum. So we're really going to cover kind of the full gamut of the types of data that you can be collecting, whether you have reopened or not, or regardless of which phase in that reopening plan that you're in. Like I mentioned a couple minutes ago, this is our second webinar in our Return to Fun series. The first one, which we did a few weeks ago, was regarding the white paper we did as far as the research that we conducted from guests throughout the entire industry, and that's available on amusementadvantage.com. And so today we're going to be talking about the data that you can collect. So I'll introduce myself first. I am Joshua Liebman. I am the Director of Business Development for Amusement Advantage. I also briefly want to introduce Scott Carson as well. He was unable to make it today due to a last-minute family issue, but he is the President and Chief Experience Officer of Amusement Advantage. And I am also excited to be joined by Ben Story, who's the CEO of Avius, who I'll be turning this over to in just a minute. So to give you just a quick little background, if you are not familiar with Amusement Advantage or not familiar with Avius, I believe most people who are in the webinar right now are familiar at least with one of our companies. But Amusement Advantage, we've been serving the attractions industry for about 24 years now. We are the only mystery shop provider that works exclusively with attractions. We work with about 600 attractions throughout the US and Canada. And I also do a number of guest service training programs, guest feedback analysis, and anything to do with consumer analytics or quality assurance. And like I mentioned, I am thrilled to be joined today by my good friend, Ben Story, who's the CEO of Avius, and I'll turn it over to you, Ben.
Thank you, Josh, and hi, everyone. So in case you hadn't heard who we are, been around a similar time to Amusement Advantage in the attractions industry, but also serving other industries. So it's quite nice to be able to pull on resources from the aviation world, not just the leisure facilities, but also sort of healthcare and other bits of arenas that we work in. You've possibly seen us and not even realized who we are if you've traveled through any number of airports across North America and across the rest of the world. We're the guys that do the tablets with the smiley faces, with a bit more intelligence behind it. But yeah, we've been around about 15 years and collected a fairly significant amount of data. So if Josh, you can advance the slide, I wanted to run through a very quick agenda. We promise this is not going to be death by PowerPoint. We want this to be as interactive as possible. So I've got a few bits that we're going to step through, and you can see on the agenda that Josh and I are going to sort of tag team it between us and run through a few topics. There is deliberately a section of time towards the end for questions. However, as much as everyone is on mute, there is the little pop out towards the bottom somewhere down there. Oh, there you go. That you can use the chat feature if you want to ask any questions, and whoever's not speaking out of Josh and I will be monitoring that. And if it's applicable, we'll interject at that point in the presentation. If not, there will be a natural time for questions at the end, where we've also culminated the questions that we've had from the folks that have registered in advance. So without further ado, I will hand the microphone back over to Josh.
All right. Thank you, Ben. Much appreciated. So first, just wanted to quickly cover just this question of what should I be doing now? And this question is applicable, like I mentioned, regardless of what part of your reopening plan you are in. There's been a lot of questions as far as what is the type of data that we should be collecting from guests? Should we even reach out to guests during this time? Is the data that we're collecting today, is it, the same type of data we wanted to collect a month ago at this time? And knowing that we've kind of progressed and we're continually gaining more and more knowledge along the way, should dictate the type of data that you want to be collecting and as far as what you should be doing now. And it kind of comes just from the overarching notion that no one is a post-COVID expert. We don't know specifically what things are going to be like, just a few months down the road, certainly not a year down the road. And the way that we can kind of get closer and closer to more expertise related to COVID and operating in a post-COVID world is through the data and through the research that we're able to collect. So the first message is really don't ignore your guests. Definitely be reaching out to them. And I like to say, bring your guests into the conversation. So if you're in a position right now where you are looking at what your pre-opening plan looks like and completely revamping your operating model and looking at what's going to work and what's not going to work, how do we price the experience now that it's going to be completely different? Do we discount it or do we make it more expensive because we're reducing capacity? All those answers at least can shed some light based off of your guests coming into the conversation and being able to involve your guests at every step of the way. So by doing research, by doing surveys, even just by picking up the phone and calling your guests who may have left you feedback at some point in the past, using the voice of the guest can substantially help you in determining what the best path forward should be. Not to say that should dismiss anything else or any other, external. All of this is very much interwoven with everything that each state's reopening plan is, everything that each industry association is putting out there as far as reopening plans, reopening success, of course, CDC guidelines, kind of interweaving all of that together. And your most loyal guests, I wanted to make sure to put this note in here because this is a message that I've been stressing since the beginning. They want to be part of your success. They can't wait to visit you when you reopen. I was just recently talking, Matt Heller and I, we do our Attraction Pros COVID-19 video series, and we were talking to David Crandall, the general manager at Fiesta Village in California. And he reopened a couple of weeks ago, and I asked him, I said, can you tell us about your first guests back? And he said they were in the parking lot long before, the park even opened. And they were so excited when they found out we were opening, and they were annual pass holders, and they came back every single day all weekend. And just tying that in with bringing your guests into the conversation and involving your guests at every step of the way, your most loyal guests are going to be the ones who are able to provide this great feedback and this great data that you're able to use to be able to align any strategic implementations and operational improvements or enhancements that are coming along the way. And then they get to be the ones who also give you feedback when you do reopen and as you are reopening, as far as how well this met their expectation and any feedback for continual improvement that you're able to do. So looking at it from this standpoint right here, what data should I collect? And the overarching message for this here, and Ben and I were just discussing this a little bit ago, that the data that you should be collecting, whether it's COVID related or even during normal times, is really data that you have the ability to act on. So given where we're at today, we're at the end of May, still a lot of unknowns, but we know a whole lot more than we did 2 months ago when it was just this vast, wide open question of really what happens next. So the data that you should be collecting today might be a little bit different than the data that you would want to collect a month ago before a lot of pre-opening plans and CDC guidelines and everything about masks and physical distancing was really put into place. So as far as the data that you should be collecting, you really want to drive into the guest's perception and what their actions will be in regards to your reopening. So a couple of top ones here is, the likelihood to visit you upon reopening. And if they're not likely to visit you upon reopening, what is that top concern that impacts their decision to visit? So really information that you're able to use within your operations, within your marketing, within your facility, within really all of that, the things that you are able to control. If you were to ask guests today their likelihood to want to wear masks when they come visit you, you might get some interesting responses from that, especially if you give them a comment box and let them, share their feedback open-ended style. But it might not necessarily dictate what it is that your operating procedure would be. If you're looking at guidelines from other similar businesses around you, or particularly the state's guidance, that it might not specifically provide information that you're able to act on. In some cases, maybe it will, but the overarching message is the data that you should be collecting is the data that you're really able to use and act on based on the results. And what I recommend doing, or what we both recommend doing really, is getting a good amount of both quantitative and qualitative responses. So quantitative from the standpoint of metric-driven questions, whether it's multiple choice, ranking certain things on a perception, and those will help you justify decisions that maybe you aren't sure of right now by measurement of aggregated perceptions. So looking at that quantitative data of the vast majority, or like to say aggregated quantifiable demand that your guests are saying are able to help you, like I said, justify decisions that maybe you aren't completely sure about as far as implementing into your operations. One example that I'll give you is a client of ours, was asking or wanted to know, should they implement a VIP program now that they're going to be reducing capacity, and to say, would this even be of interest? Should we even go down this route of offering this, knowing it's going to be at a higher price point, but we want to see, would guests go for this or not? So it's something that they're able to implement into their operating model and to their marketing message and their communication, their packaging from that standpoint. But then going into the qualitative data, the reason why I think this is so important too is because this also lets your guests decide what should be the top KPIs or key performance indicators for you to focus on that maybe you didn't include in a particular survey. There's really only so much that you can gather from a quantitative survey before you hit survey fatigue. If you're asking a 50, 75 question survey, it might not produce the best results just because it might result in people just kind of falling out throughout it. So being able to combine the quantitative with the qualitative allows your guests to potentially introduce new KPIs or new concerns that you can focus on that might otherwise not have been considered. And so it's a great way to bring guests into the conversation, to get their opinion on what they feel is most important to them. And you likely will see a lot of similarities based off of, or comparing it with the quantitative data, but it's interesting to see the outliers and then measuring the importance of them along the way. So then moving into how should we collect this data? And, this is another interesting one too, because, both Ben and I, both Amusement Advantage and Avius, the normal course of business is that we help collect data that is in tune with your operation. So whether it's based off of a guest's specific visit or sending in mystery shoppers to be able to evaluate the full operation, if you're closed, you're not necessarily able to get that data that is related to a specific previous visit. So this is something that you really need to leverage your existing audience with to be able to get the most amount of data, even if they may not have visited prior to your closing, or maybe they visited a year ago, but they're still, following you on Facebook, or they're still on your email list, or they're still engaged in some way, shape, or form, allows you to push out that survey to your current audience as kind of more of a micro market research project rather than an ongoing measurement tool. Now, of course, once we get back into operations, that's when we can talk about what we can do as far as from an ongoing measurement standpoint of the effectiveness of your implementations and any additional fine tuning that needs to be done. But right now, if let's say you are planning to reopen or you are otherwise still shut down at this time, then we could talk about using your existing audience, so your email list and your social media channels, to be able to send out the survey with the data, the information that you need to know, the questions that you have that your guests can contribute to. One of the key components that I've always seen to be very successful, and this is one of the core attributes of Backlooper, which I'll talk about in a little bit, is tying in what I call a smart incentive when sending out a survey or when asking your guests for feedback. Hopefully, a lot of people will just click on that email or click on the link from Facebook or Twitter and go right to the survey. But you can run into seeing smaller response rates. If you tie in some sort of incentive, then you're obviously going to see more people who are engaged and more people who are going into the survey. One quick note on that is only to offer incentives if you are doing internal research and asking guests to provide feedback or take a survey for you internally, rather than saying, post a review on TripAdvisor, post a review on Google Reviews, and get a BOGO deal for your next visit or something like that. That's seen as I would say kind of a big no-no from the online review sites. You can end up getting flagged from that standpoint. It looks like you're manipulating the reviews. But if you're looking for feedback internally, especially if you want to hear from your guests what their concerns are, what you can do to improve, you're not just looking for glowing fluff to hear about how great you are. You genuinely want that constructive feedback. Tying in a smart incentive allows you to do that. Now, a smart incentive is something that is really a win-win between you and your guests. And for the guest side of it, it's something that they see of value that would hopefully, in theory, lead them to making a purchase upon completion of the survey, or at a very minimum, downloading a coupon and coming back for a future visit. But at the same time, it's also a win for you too, because the best kind of incentives are something that's going to go into effect on a future visit, but also something that is not going to cost you money in the long run. So if you have multiple options for admission, or multiple options for ways that guests are able to purchase tickets or access your attraction, of maybe discounting it from your most premium option rather than discounting it off of the base admission or the base price, so that whatever dollar amount they spend, ideally we want that to be higher than your average per capita spend. Otherwise, you end up becoming a victim of the success of your survey. If you say, hey, we're going to give you a $5 Starbucks gift card or enter a drawing to win a $500 Amazon gift card or whatever it is, that's only going to increase the cost of it, versus you've got a lot of value that you can provide that you would normally charge a premium for. If you take a little bit off of that and come in between that and your base price, the guest is going to see the value for it. Another piece of it too,
incentives is the fact it's a smart incentive, that it's a guaranteed incentive. So it's not a prize draw as such, because we've seen a correlation when we've had incentives of a prize draw nature, that people will tell you what you want to hear as opposed to what they're really thinking. This position with Backlooper is, regardless of whatever you say, you're still going to get the reward at the end of the day for spending the time. So trying to make sure we demonstrate that to the guest and set their expectations is key to ensuring you're getting fair and ultimately useful data.
Right. Even if you are writing a scathing review or feedback that's going directly to them, you should still be eligible for for that reward or that incentive at the end of it. And this here on the right-hand side of the screen is from Extreme Action Park, who we're working with. That this is what they are offering here, that once the guest gets through the end of their survey, that they're able to get $10 off of their attraction pass for their next visit. And they're able to download that coupon right away, and then they can, they've got access to that. And like Ben said, it's, that's exactly the same regardless of what the feedback is that, that you put in. So, so that's a good point, as people think that there is a prize correlated to it, that they will write a more glowing, less applicable review or provide less applicable feedback if they think they're going to win something rather than something that is a guarantee regardless every single time. Another piece of it too is don't set it and forget it. Don't just send it once and assume that that's going to get you all the feedback that you need. People are often skipping over emails, or maybe not on Facebook that day, or weren't scrolling through Instagram at the right time. So sending reminder emails, certainly not daily, obviously not being a nag about it, but maybe once a week or so, until you've got the sufficient amount of of responses that you were looking for that you feel like you can make an accurate, justified decision from. And you can set that up front as well, as far as the length of time and the minimum response rate that you want to see that will allow you to close the survey. So with that, I'm going to turn this back over to Ben, who has been visiting some attractions lately that have opened in Central Florida, and can talk a little bit about what we can expect from reopening from those that have.
Yeah, I put myself forward as a volunteer. Someone had to do it. So I'm going to say it's not directly related to the topic of this subject, but it will lead on quite nicely. So I'm sure some of you have already read some of this in the media, but for those that haven't, the pictures shown here are a combination of Universal Studios with their City Walk and also Disney Springs. So as I'm sure you've seen, there are some new expectations that guests are used to and expecting. The most formidable and the most, I guess, not necessarily intimidating, but the most obvious is obviously the temperature checking, which I've now been a privilege of going through twice. And it is very, very quick. It's non-invasive. And it gives you that almost that sense of, well, if I'm being checked, then everyone else is. So I think, I've sort of led here with signage. I think making sure you're explaining that to your guests, especially if you're in a pre-opening situation, just tell them, they're looking for a little bit of leadership and a little bit of guidance. In terms of when I've done City Walk twice actually. The first time I went, the temperature checking area was further towards the bag checking, which the downside to that was if you got all the way to there and then people were failing it, they had a big old walk back past other guests to get back to their car, which then was causing complaint issues. But something else I noticed on my first visit was who was going to police the masks. So you had to have a mask on if you were over the age of, I believe, 2 or 3, unless you were eating or smoking. And I noticed there was a number of times where guests didn't have masks on and they just pulled them down because it was extremely hot. It was a classical Florida afternoon. And it was an interesting one to know who was going to be policing that. And on the first visit, there certainly wasn't anyone policing it. That being said, I went again this weekend, and it's something that they actually now have a specific team dressed in Universal polos walking around as a guest operations team. And they will simply point out, if you haven't got a mask on, they'll approach them at distance, remind them they need to have their mask on. But moreover than that, they actually had a backpack which had a number of disposable masks that they were happily handing out to people, which was, again, expectation setting, trying to resolve any issues, and ultimately giving the guests no excuse. Because I can imagine when the parks actually open up in Central Florida, if you go on a ride and you get your mask wet, well, it's extremely difficult to breathe through that. So they've immediately overcome that objection with having a number of disposable masks on hand and at no cost, which I thought was quite interesting. So in terms of setting expectations and going back to the data collection piece, as Josh opened with, your guests visit you for a reason. They want to tell you, they want to pass on constructive criticism, but they also want to pass on praise. So I think it's important to mention, and be over the top about letting your guests know why you're collecting the feedback. You're not just doing a traditional survey for the sake of it. You're doing it because you want to help refine the experience. Look at Universal. They've obviously taken the feedback they got very, very quickly about where the temperature checking point was, and they corrected it within a matter of days. So don't be scared to react and change, and lead your guests through sort of a positive experience. So on to the next slide, if you don't mind, Josh.
Yeah, and I just want to kind of add on to that's why, any data that you collect now, while you might still be closed or planning to reopen, will need to continually be refreshed when you do open, because you're going to have all these new procedures in place that, you don't have as much intelligence from the guest perception as you previously did. So that ongoing research is going to be crucial when you do reopen for something like, should the temperature check, be moved X amount of feet, just because of certain issues that may not have been able to be anticipated prior to opening, prior to having live guests in the park.
So this is everything I'm going to show you here is real data. And it's something I wanted to address, and I mentioned it to Josh and he encouraged me to put it into a slide. I'm approaching you here as the CEO of Avios, and 90% plus of our feedback comes from touchscreen kiosks. Now, as we enter a post-COVID world, we obviously have had a fair few meetings at a senior level of, are people still going to want to touch devices to leave their feedback? So this was some data that we've been collecting constantly from, and I've got their full permission to use the data, from Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. The graph shows you from left to right from January the 1st, week number by week number, the number of surveys that they've collected, rolled up as a week. Now, one of the really interesting things that we saw here is naturally there was a decline because there's a decline in passenger numbers, but we provide them daily reporting. And I was looking over some of their daily reports. And one of the things that I noticed was we were still getting around about sort of 500 to 600 passengers leaving feedback day by day throughout the peak of this crisis, when it was very unknown. It was, you know, people didn't know if it was safe to go out at all. And yet you've got people in airports actually traveling on planes. So I pushed back onto the airport and asked them to get some passenger numbers for pre-COVID versus through COVID. And one of the things that we saw, as you'll see on screen, is we actually, by every 1,000 passengers that came through, we had far more times. We had 18% of passengers coming through the restrooms at the airport leaving feedback, which shocked me. I'm not going to lie, it was completely counterintuitive. And I'm not saying that this is going to be a trend that we'll see everywhere as attractions start to open up, but it did reinforce to me that some of the processes they've done in terms of increasing frequency of cleaning, advertising that the screens that they're using are antibacterial, and making sure restrooms, which is where this data's come from, there are more staff visible for the actual passengers passing through. So I guess my overarching comment is, don't be scared, you know, be aware that we need to change and adjust. But when you get out there into the real world, it almost feels like you're breaking the rules. And I'll happily answer any questions in the Q&A section of, you know, what it was like to go around City Walk. And there was times where we got quite close to another family and sort of had to move over without necessarily realizing it. But then when you saw someone without a mask on, it felt that they were breaking the rules. And it was a very weird society, but then you kind of normalize to what is the new normal. So yeah, I wanted to share that data of, you know, don't freak out. We're not saying that everyone needs to go and put a touchscreen in. Obviously we want to evolve and move with things, but it's not a dead fish in the water by any means. So the next slide is going to show you, again, an image that you may well have seen on social media. The bottom left is, again, from my walk around City Walk. For anyone that didn't realize, Universal and their insights team would typically do a guest intercept. So they'll have teams of people back in the day with tablets or iPads, and they would approach people, give them the device and let them fill out the 5-minute survey on that device. They've now had to evolve, so they've still got those teams and they're very present and visual, but instead they're holding up these lollipops that have got a QR code on it. And for those that don't know what a QR code is, and I'm sure you've seen them, it's a quick read code. So essentially it's the same as going to a website URL, but you can just open the camera app on your phone, point it in the right direction, and it immediately opens up. So they're certainly evolving in terms of how they're collecting their feedback. And even since I've visited, I've been also sent an email from them for me to leave post feedback online. As I briefly mentioned on the right-hand side, with our devices, if we haven't got them fitted already, we've been upgrading the screen. So actually throughout 2020, any devices that have gone out there have got an antibacterial screen. So it's come from a company in Germany, but effectively the screen is alive with a layer of good bacteria, I'm told, that kills bad bacteria, but it takes out 99.9% of all known bacteria. So we've actually fitted them, but not necessarily advertised the fact to people. So that's something we're now retrofitting. So again, it's all about explaining what the new normal is and reassuring people. The picture here also shows a recently installed hand gel sanitizer next to the actual device, just to make sure we're covering off sort of every potential objection you might well have from your returning guests.
Yeah. So a couple things on this that I find interesting is first the QR code on the left-hand side. I feel like QR codes have been around for what, like 10 years, but they've just sort of always been there, right? So like, do you see there being a massive surge in the need and the use for QR codes now?
I've seen a spike in it, and I think yes. The nice thing is that there's no cost to a QR code. Any of you here that've got your websites, you can advertise your own website in a QR code for free. It doesn't cost anything. And I think the rising interest in having contactless experiences is where I think you're going to see a lot more. Example, Disney Springs, a lot of the restaurants have now made their menus available through a QR code. So you can have a paper disposable menu, or you can get it on your own website, because people have that level of comfort and reassurance of using their own technology.
I think that's cool, and just kind of adding to the list of just emerging trends in the industry over the last several years, and that, you know, this is one that is definitely worth looking at, you know, whether it's collecting data or menus in the restaurant, that now you could save money on printing menus, and you can make updates to them in real time, or at least, you know, much more frequently than you're normally able to, because you don't have to worry about printing anymore.
Well, that's the interesting thing with these signs that Universal are using. That code is obviously static, regardless of where you were around City Walk. It's the same code, and it goes to a link to an online survey. But obviously, Universal can adjust that survey on a daily basis. So I would imagine that it was probably this bit of feedback that led them to the questions of why was the temperature checking so far into the experience versus right when you leave your car.
So can I scan this? I can scan that QR code right there off my computer, actually. So yeah, so that is one thing, that if you're going to have the QR codes, to not have them be static, have them be regularly changing and updating.
Well, that's one of the challenges. It's almost like you've seen this deck before, Josh, but if you jump forward one slide, this is something that we'd been working on behind the scenes, but we've now accelerated the development of it. So we've updated our touch screens rather than having to just use the touch interface. For those that want to, you can go and scan. But one of the key things of smart code, as we've called it, is that code refreshes itself every few seconds. So rather than it being a static code, a bit like that picture that I saw, and Josh now has the Universal survey up on his cell phone that he could quite happily take, and it would flow into the data set. What we've developed with smart code, that code will refresh. So if Josh was, or anyone here was to take a picture of this slide, that code would have already expired. For the purpose of this, it's just a mock-up. It won't take you anywhere other than our website, I believe. But the idea behind that, it's just a natural evolution to give. Again, it's going back to giving the guests a choice. You know, what makes them feel safe? Yes, we want to lead them and give them good advice, but this is just a way that we can give them that option to use their own device. But from what we believe, we're the only organization out there that's thought about the data security side of things. You know, before with Universal, with their tablets, you had to be on site to fill out the tablet. Now they've got these signs, that picture's floating around on social media. Are they going to reprint them every week? I doubt it. So it's just ensuring that, again, going back to data accuracy and making sure it's you know, accurately correcting and collating that data to the area where you want it.
Yeah. Ben, real quick, before we go on, we have a question about the antibacterial screens.
Yep.
Michael asks, is there something on the market that could be used for large interactive screens?
I believe so. I'm more than happy to share the resource that we've found. And as I say, we've purely been getting them for tablet form devices, so up to 10.1 inches. But I'm more than happy to share, and I guess, Josh, as you send you a follow-up, we can include it on that.
Sure, yeah.
I don't know if they've got them for the larger screens. I would be shocked if they sat back and not updated. One of the things on the screens is they do have a shelf life. So they're only effectively alive for up to 2 years, I believe, and then they'll need replacing. But it's something that's, we've only found one supplier of these ISO certified ones.
That's cool. Yeah. And then, you know, you also make the good point there of this message right up on top that says antibacterial screen. And, you know, that goes to something that we've been talking about for a little while, of that it's one thing to have these increased sanitation procedures in place, and then there's the other thing of what is actually going to make that guest, more comfortable seeing. So having the screen in and of itself is step one. Putting the message on here that says this is an antibacterial screen lets the guest know, because if they don't know, then they're going to say, I'm not touching that because so many other people have touched that. But of saying, putting that in there. So cool. So then tying all this together and, looking at the data that you should be collecting, the way that you can be collecting it, whether it is in tune with your operation or whether it is on more of a market research type large scale survey that you send out, that data is only going to be as good as what you do with it. So if that just comes in and you're not reviewing it, you're not, really looking into saying, well, what does this mean for my operation? What does this mean for my, pricing and packaging? Then it's not going to be as valuable for you versus really going in there and picking it apart and saying, all right, this is the quantified aggregated demand, or these are the KPIs that our guests are bringing to my attention through open-ended responses, and looking at both the quantitative and the qualitative. One thing that I think is really important is to let the data be your guide, but don't let it dictate your decisions. And if you see, you're going to see a lot of, I'll give you just a really easy example. Every guest and every employee must have a mask at all times. And just on the flip side of that is guests and employees should not have to wear masks. I will not, wear a mask when I come visit you. You're going to get all of that right there. So rather than letting it dictate the decisions that you make, really allowing that to be your guide. And when you're looking to implement these solutions, don't just solve for the concerns, but solve for the perceptions that the concerns lead to. So when looking at, if we use masks as an example, the subset of guests that refuse to wear a mask and are going to be, angry for requiring guests to wear a mask, if that is what you implement, of making it a communication tool and, using that along the lines of saying, hey, we completely understand that you don't want to wear a mask in the summer heat. It's not comfortable. We wish we weren't wearing masks during this time, right? Of really using that as an empathetic statement, and then tying it in with, of course, the reason for doing that, and taking the precautionary measures towards keeping all your guests safe. I'll give another example of just kind of not letting the data itself, not solving for the concern, but solving for the perception. Is I have a client of mine who I've worked with for several years who's an aquarium, and they would get comments on TripAdvisor a lot that would say the aquarium is too small. And if they were to look at that and say, all right, we're going to solve for the solution, it's just making the building bigger, but that's not necessarily the most feasible thing to do. So they pulled back from that and said, well, what is really the perception that surrounds this? And people were saying, we were in and out in 45 minutes. We didn't think there were enough exhibits. We didn't learn as much as we wanted to. So rather than, just building more exhibits or adding more square footage to the building, because guests weren't complaining about the square footage of the building when they said the aquarium is too small, they were complaining that the time that they spent was not worth what they expected. So they said it's too expensive for what you get. So when they were able to solve for the perception, what they did was really just reallocate a lot of staff members and have them engage with guests more, have them be more proactive and go up to talk to guests about maybe the exhibit that they were in, which ultimately slowed them down. And guests were staying in the building longer, and guests were learning more, and they were spending more time in the exact same number of exhibits that they were previously. And you look at the comments that came on TripAdvisor, someone said shortly after that, I think this is one of the largest aquariums in the world. So again, they did not add a single square foot to the building, but they solved for the perception of what those complaints did. So don't just solve for the concerns, solve for the perceptions that lead to those concerns. And then with changes that you do, and this goes into that last message of really communicating everything to your guests, really let them know what you've done. And, that was important pre-COVID. And I would say that importance has just amplified substantially. If guests want to know what's going to be different when we come visit you? They know it's going to be different. If it's the same, that's a problem, right? If they think it's the same, that's going to be a problem. But letting them know, say, hey, we've taken your feedback and we've implemented XYZ changes because we want to make sure you can have an enjoyable, comfortable, and safe experience, just like you've had prior to when we closed for COVID. And now we want to invite you back and encourage you to see the changes. And we want your feedback on the changes that we've implemented. So things like those temperature checks that Ben was talking about earlier, of saying, what was this in the right spot? Maybe not necessarily asking that directly, but that's something that can come through your open-ended feedback as far as what guests are perceiving from their standpoint compared to what you are seeing from the operator standpoint. So now that we've covered all that, we really want to share with you just a few things that we want to do to help you out. This is by no means a sales pitch whatsoever. These are resources that we are offering for free. If you are an Amusement Advantage client, if you normally get our mystery shops, then the first thing that we're going to do when we resume shops, and we've already started doing this, is adding a specific COVID-19 measurement section into the mystery shop form. We've come up with a master list of questions. You can go through these questions and determine what's going to be most applicable for you, strike out any questions that maybe aren't as applicable, add in new questions if you feel like it's specific to your operation, and we're going to make sure that our shoppers start measuring them. This quote here on the right-hand side is from Christian from Congo River Golf, who we started mystery shops right after he reopened. And, he saw the need immediately when he said, hey, we're open. We now need to be getting this data. And he reached out to us even before they opened, said, hey, we're reopening shortly and we're ready to start the shops because we need this information and we need to know how guests are perceiving the modifications we made to our operations. Another thing we're doing, and this is very helpful if you have an app for your guests to use while they're on property, Instant Intercept. We initially launched Instant Intercept last year. If we met with you at IAAPA, you probably heard about it. And now this new element of it is now it integrates into your app. And while your guests are on property through geofencing and geotargeting, they actually get push notifications for immediate surveys that lead to purchase incentives, so coupons that they're able to use right then and there. So you're able to get some quick hit data from a large number of guests while they're there, while they're on property. That's when you do start shops up again, that's going to be free for 3 months. And then there's going to be additional options and more customization available after that as well. And then the final thing that we're doing has to do with Backlooper, which we mentioned a couple of times throughout the presentation. This is about post-visit feedback collection, specifically open-ended responses and qualitative data. It helps you generate more feedback internally. So any concerns that your guests have, you're not learning about them through online reviews. This is a buffer between a guest complaint or guest concern and an online review. Of course, it can't stop guests from posting online, but we've noticed that it kind of halts them first. So once they've provided the feedback to you, they're less likely to post a negative review. And we're offering the introductory version free through the end of August. So this is something that I've been reaching out to everybody about to get set up on. Even while you're closed, you can still implement this. So you can still collect that information from those guests who might be on your email list and your social media following, push the message out to them to be able to get that feedback. And then even tying in a purchase incentive with it allows you to start generating revenue even while you're closed. So with that, I'll turn it over back to Ben as far as what you have available for your clients as well.
Cheers, Josh. I'm aware we have only got 10 minutes left, so we want to get to questions. So I'm going to go through this quicker than I planned. We've been offering throughout the whole of this COVID crisis a wellness survey. So this is deliberately targeted as an employee-facing survey. We feel sort of it's an issue real close to our hearts here at Avius, that we want to make sure that everyone's both mental and physical well-being is being catered for and looked after through this crisis. So we've offered that out to a number of organizations and deployed it. So it's at no cost, there's no catch. And we're extending that out till the end of the year. So if you want to find out how your staff are feeling in advance of opening up, even through to when you've started opening up, how their stress levels are, then feel free to reach out. I'll be more than happy to help you with that. Again, a bit like Josh, to our existing clients, we're updating and having some COVID-related questions in there, managing guest expectation. Smart code, as I briefly talked about, that's going to be a free upgrade. That's not chargeable. So any existing clients that have our survey devices effectively can turn on that feature. And that's actually going to be launching, I was going to say in a grand gesture next month, but I realize next month is only in a few days. So that'll be coming very, very soon, and I'm sure you'll see some bits. But other than that, and this goes for both Amusement Advantage, for Scott, myself, and Josh, we're here to help. So you may not be clients, don't be a stranger. Like if there's some sort of advice, you know, I've got clients that use competitor software that have made a bit of a hash of things. And I just said to them, I was like, why didn't you phone me? And they're like, well, we're not using them. I'm like, I don't mind, like use our resources. Yes, Josh and I are busy, but we'll always make time, especially for the, you know, the extended IAPA, FAA world, and beyond. So don't be afraid to ask.
Thank you. I will echo that as well. So well said. So with that said, we want to open it up to questions. I know that there were a few in the chat, but first we just wanted to pull just a few of the questions that we got when people registered for the webinar. And so the first one, as far as best format to collect information, I think we covered that pretty well throughout the webinar. So I do hope that this answered your question. But the best format of that combination of quantitative and qualitative, making sure you're getting the information that you can use, getting information that you can really act on, and looking for guests' perception and looking for their likelihood to return, as well as any concerns for why they might not return.
From my point, I'd say it's a combination. There's no one-fit-all solution.
Yeah.
It's very much giving your guests the power to leave the feedback however they want, in combination with everything that you know that we can provide.
Sure. Yeah. And that goes nicely with, you know, with Smart Code, and, you know, you've got the tablet with the touchscreen still available, but you've got the Smart Code option available with it as well. So it's, you know, letting people make contact if they want to make contact, especially if that hand sanitizer is right next to it. And if that antibacterial screen is on it. And then, you know, giving them the option of just saying, hey, we totally understand if you don't want to touch this, you know, now you've got the Smart Code QR option. I like this one here. How do you balance providing an escape to your customers, but still ask them questions about COVID? And, you know, this is a really important one for the entire industry, especially as we are getting to reopen. What we provide is that escapism. Regardless if you are a theme park, zoo, museum, aquarium, bowling center, trampoline park, FEC, whatever it is, we are the escapism from quarantine, from isolation. You know, and even if we still need to be physically distant, I've come to hate the term socially distant or social distancing, because we are finding ways to be social even while physically distant. And, you know, it's about not letting your service standard slide because there are different procedures in place, and not letting a mask stop you from smiling, you know, not letting a 6-foot barrier or a plexiglass barrier stop you from delivering a personal experience to your guests. And, you know, a lot of it has to do with expressing gratitude to your guests. Your guests who come back are the ones who really want to see you succeed, and who really need you during this time when they are allowed to leave the house, when they are allowed to go visit an attraction again, you know, from an industry that completely disappeared for a couple of months. And it's, you know, something that we want to make sure we stay committed to that escapism and provide the experience that we provided them before, you know, but just using these different enhancements as a different way to provide the experience. You have anything to add to that, Ben?
I think, I say directly answering it, everyone here on the call is here to provide experiences and make memories. That's the overarching #1 goal. It's just I guess a side element of that once they've had that good experience, giving them an opportunity to express their opinions both for traditional questions, but also for COVID related, I don't think you're going to struggle. I would like to think as attractions open up, if I was to fill out that universal survey, I was very pleased with the way that they were so overt and obvious about their processes, the security person stopping the person without the mask, and also the fact they've limited capacity. So when the parks open up next week, it's not going to hopefully be shoulder to shoulder, because they're taking the financial hit themselves by restricting it.
Yeah, exactly. People, if you ask questions in the way that are gauging their perceptions, they want to see that you are looking out and that you are taking these concerns seriously. We all know that you are, so it's the more that you can communicate that to your guests, and stressing to them in these surveys of saying, hey, we want to know what we can do to make your experience comfortable.
Josh, this is your 4.5 minute warning.
All right, cool. So the last one here, when the stay-at-home order is lifted, when will your family go back to an entertainment center? So I think this is actually a really good group question here. So if everyone wants to throw their answer into the chat, and I know that this might vary based off of where you live, what the reopening procedures are. This particular question came from Michigan, which I know is very similar to Illinois as far as lockdown procedures, but really curious. I mean, I feel like I would go back to one pretty quickly, knowing that I will take care of myself and be respectful for those around me. But I know that it might not be the same, for everyone. So curious if anyone has any response to that for those who are joining us here. If you wanted to put that in.
I think it's potentially maybe slightly swayed on us answering, Josh, because we're obviously it runs in our veins. As soon as this book opens, I've been there twice. With Universal.
Exactly, you were the test dummy for all of us.
That's the thing. I'm a believer, but absolutely being respectful of other people and myself. That's the key. Do you want to cover off Andrew's questions while we're waiting for some other responses to come back in?
Yeah.
So Andrew's raised a question about institutions being committed to sustainability during the reopening. With the added waste of single-use items, no reusability, etc. Is there a concern that institutions are not going to be able to keep to their mission? Would a question on a survey be applicable?
No, I think that's a really good question. Especially kind of with the whole conversation of, say, like single-use plastics, over the last several years or so, and now we're talking about single-use masks and and all of that. And I think that and this is me just kind of speaking kind of based on opinion. I think there's opportunity to stay committed to the mission from that standpoint. If, let's say, you're a zoo or aquarium, they're very much kind of conservation driven, or any kind of cultural institution. Even a lot of for-profit theme parks have this sustainability mission. Free masks seem to be kind of a norm right now from a safety standpoint of, if you don't have a mask, a disposable one will be provided to you. But if you look at like, if you equate that to like a grocery bag, in like Whole Foods near me, they'll bag your groceries, but they also sell the reusable bags, right next to it. And they encourage you, and they'll give you a discount if you bring your reusable bag, and you don't get you don't use the paper bags or the single-use bags. And maybe there's an opportunity to do that with masks too. I'm saying, yes, we have the masks available, complimentary, but maybe if you purchase a mask, maybe there's 10% off on food and beverage or something like that. I mean, if it's something that can tie in with a smart incentive while they're on property and allows them to see the value and see the discount and keep your mission aligned with that, that you have the ability to continue communicating it.
Yeah, no, it's a tricky one. It's a balancing act, isn't it? Because it's safety versus sustainability, and
right.
It may sound awful, but elephant in the room, my opinion is that everyone's always going to take their own safety over anything else.
Right.
It's just a matter of where that balance is, and there will be a time that things will return to normal. We're living this now for the next potentially 12, 18, 24 months. It's an unknown. None of us know that at this point.
Mhm.
Questions just coming from Chris.
Yeah, from several webinars I've attended this week, places are seeing about 10% of their normal numbers of guests upon reopening. For the places where states don't require masks, they've been seeing less than 30% of their guests wearing them. Well, that's, I think that goes to the individual operators as far as if you're going to require masks and how it's able to be enforced. I mean, I remember thinking a month ago, if attractions or theme parks are requiring masks, and the enforcement is going to be such an uphill battle with that. So I think that the enforcement needs to be key, needs to be crucial, but also gentle as well. If there are announcements in my grocery stores, kindly reminding everyone to keep their masks on and to keep a distance from one another. And there's those recorded messages, and I imagine that if they need to step it up, then there's personal friendly reminders from staff members, and then escalate it if you need to.
I think there's an element of almost social pressure as well.
Yeah.
From what I've seen at a very limited opening from City Walk, but where people didn't have a mask on, you could almost tell that other members of the public were not quite frowning upon them, but it was noticeable, put it that way. It was immediately like, oh, well, are they eating? Are they smoking? Well, no, they're not. So why on this really hot 90+ degree day, why do they not have to wear a mask and I do?
Right. Yeah, exactly. Edwin, I live in Texas. Our company has already opened some of our facilities. That's awesome. So glad to hear that. I went back almost immediately. I'm confident in the procedures we've put in place, and it would be wrong to expect guests to come back while I didn't feel safe attending. So yeah, I think that's
a great litmus test.
Yeah, exactly. What will you feel safe doing, and make sure that your operation looks like that. Chris says, again, most of the places that were open more than 1 week did see gradual improvements on attendance. Obviously, the places that were reporting from outdoor venues were seeing better numbers. I think that, we knew from the beginning that it wasn't going to be flip on a switch and everything's back to normal, especially now that there's substantial capacity reductions, and especially if the locations are taking those capacity restrictions into their own hands as far as, from really controlling that. And then they'll have the ability, kind of as we gradually go to the next phases, to up that capacity limit, at their own discretion, really.
Yeah. Nice. Well, I'm aware that we have just slid over the hour mark. If anyone else has got any other questions, feel free to either use the text box or unmute yourself and speak now or forever hold your peace. Yeah, I'm sure Josh echoes this. I really appreciate everyone making time for this. It feels a little bit that the last 6-8 weeks have been a bit like death by Zoom or Teams meetings or GoToMeeting. So we do appreciate. It's been very well attended. There's been some really good questions, and hopefully we've been able to share. I guess my parting message is, don't be a stranger. We're all in this together. So reach out to your competitors, and I know we will do in this. In this world, share good practices, ask questions, feel free to come and ask industry experts, not just limited to Amusement Advantage and Avius. There's a whole wealth of people out there, and if we can't answer it, we certainly will know someone that can find you an answer.
Well said. Yeah. I just want to thank everyone for for coming. There's definitely no shortage of webinars out there, and a lot of educational content. So we hope that you found this valuable. If you do have any feedback, feel free to shoot us a message. And looking forward to either seeing you on the next webinar or hopefully seeing you in person soon someday.
Sounds good to me. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.